excited for you to be here, Colby, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Don. Thanks for everyone for having me today. I'm gonna share my screen and we'll get going. Are you guys seeing a full screen or partial screen?
I'm seeing your title slide.
Okay. Let me move my toolbox out of the way. All right. So welcome, everyone. Like Don said, my name is Colby Moorberg. I'm an associate professor of soil science in the Department of Agronomy. And ever since I started here, one of the main sort of teaching academic interests of mine has been open textbooks. And in my kind of journey along that process or along that track, I've learned about this concept of open pedagogy, which is the focus of the talk today. So my hope is my plan is to start with some rationale, and I'll talk about some terminology about the words open, like open textbooks, open educational resources, and so on. And then we'll get more into open pedagogy. I'll give some examples from my experiences. And then my hope is to do breakout discussions, but based on the group size, we might just kind of stay as a group and kind of go one by one for ideas that you guys might have. And then at the end, we'll have some time for discussion, and I have a couple kind of key takeaways I'd like you all to go home with today. So to start with, for the rationale, there's this term called disposable assignments. You guys might have heard this term before, but what I mean by that is an assignment where the only people that interact with that assignment are the student that creates it and the instructor that grades it. And after it's graded, no one ever sees it again. And we've all taught with these, I'm sure, and I still do. I haven't converted all my assignments to open assignments yet, but or open pedagogy type assignments. But there's the drawback of these is that there's a lot of wasted effort, you could sort of say. So there's all this effort that goes into a single product that never sees the light of day again. And I think that sort of makes these assignments not feel as useful or valuable by the students. And I think there's ways that we can improve that. And the counter option to these would be what we call renewable or reusable assignments. So these are assignments where the students create a product, and that product can have an impact for future students, or it can impact users that are outside the classroom. So it could be the general public, it could be students in other courses, it could be any sort of audience you can think of. Now, another issue that we face is the rising cost of textbooks. So textbooks have risen at a rate of 3 times that of inflation since 1998. So I know when I was a college student, like my first semester, I paid like $700 in one semester for textbooks, and that was back in, I'll date myself here, that was back in 2004. So ever since then, textbooks have continued to rise in cost, and students are feeling the pinch. There was a national survey that was done for a couple of years in a row, and it was put out by the SPIRG, and I apologize, I forget what the acronym stands for, but but the authors of that study, they had 4,000 students that responded to the survey in 2020 and 5,000 in 2021. And of all the students that replied across many different types of institutions, about 65% of the students reported that they had skipped buying a required textbook for one of their courses. And most of those students that have skipped buying a textbook worried that it would somehow negatively impact their grades because they weren't able to adequately prepare for their coursework or complete assignments and study for exams and so on. The students also reported that in order to cover the costs of textbooks, when they did buy them, they were having to work extra hours to make ends meet, or in some cases, they might skip meals. In some cases, they would prioritize access codes so they could actually submit homework as opposed to actually buying the textbook itself, because they had to get the homework in. They didn't necessarily have to have the textbook. So that's sort of brings up a whole other issue with access codes for homework platforms. And so it's overall just a big issue that students are facing. And also another issue that students face is being able to access course materials related to internet access. So that sort of plays into these textbook accessibility problems as well. Now, the results from that survey also correspond to results that I found in my own class. So this is from a paper that I published back in 2017. And I interviewed, or I surveyed students that were in my intro soil science class called Agron 305 Soils. And in that class, we had 213 students over the course of 2 semesters in the fall of 2016 and spring of 2017. And this top stacked bar chart, what the question was is, have textbook or lab manual costs ever impacted which or how many classes he took? So are they decreasing how many classes they're enrolling in for a given semester based on just the cost of these ancillary materials? And a good portion of them said that yes, it somewhat impacted it, or yes, it significantly impacted how many classes they enrolled in. So that potentially means that students are actually taking longer to graduate. So there's an opportunity cost baked into just the course materials for their classes. I also asked them, have they ever went without purchasing a textbook? And 2/3 of them said yes. And of those students, if they responded to yes, they had skipped buying a textbook, did they believe that their ability to study effectively had ever been limited by not having that textbook? And most said occasionally, and quite a few said yes. And then did they expect their grades suffered? And the majority said that probably or definitely yes. And then another takeaway that I had from that survey was that students said that they would be more likely to enroll in a class that required a textbook or lab manual that had a free or a free digital option. So if there's no cost for ancillary materials for a course, would they be more likely to take it? And they said the vast majority said they either yes or maybe. So there's definitely a demand for more affordable options for these students. So that's the rationale. Now I'm going to move into some terminology related to open education. So we have this, the broadest terms for these open resources, so we call open educational resources, or OER for short. And these resources are typically available online and without cost. This is the broadest term because it includes really all teaching materials that are openly licensed and free to students. So it could include open textbooks, it could include assignments or activities, and lots of more products and things that students are using. So open educational resources is a broad term. And then within that, we have things like open textbooks. We also have what we call the 5 R's of open. And these include, so in order to classify something as an open educational resource, we have to have the ability for anyone that's using it, they have to have the ability to retain a copy of that book. And so maybe one way to describe this is the opposite situation, where if you buy access to an online textbook, which is usually cheaper than buying a print copy, you oftentimes only get access to that textbook for 6 months. And after that, you're not able to retain it. So one of the key features of an open textbook is you're able to retain a copy. You're able to reuse it. So there's lots of ways we can reuse that textbook or revise it, which means we can adapt, modify, or improve the textbook. We can also remix. So you might have, let's say you're teaching, and maybe one textbook is really good for one topic, but a different textbook is really good at another topic. If something is truly openly licensed, then you would have the ability to kind of pick and choose what content from which resource you'd be able to use for your course, and combine them into one resource that your students can use. And then the last R is redistribute. So are you able to take your resource that you've adapted, remixed, revised, and so on, and share it with others? So those are the 5 R's of open. And the way that we facilitate this with open educational resources and open textbooks is what we call open licenses. So these are typically done through what we call Creative Commons licenses. And you're able to designate the specific license that you want to apply to a resource so that you can allow these different rights to any user. And so these rights are baked into whatever license you apply to that resource. Whereas a traditional copyright, you as the author would retain all those copyrights, and you would have to decide whether an individual could do any of these Rs. So traditional copyrights, it's like all rights reserved, whereas Creative Commons, you can pick and choose which, or in some cases, all of these rights you can give to all the users. We also have different types of OER. So I mentioned textbooks as one example, but we can also make things open that include assignments. It could be photos or blog posts or short publications. Like one example I think about quite a bit is extension publications that our extension service puts out at K-State. We could make things like that be open. It could also be wikis. Wikipedia is one example, but there's lots of other applications of wikis. So there's many different things that we can openly license. And when we put those out on the internet with those licenses, then we allow the user to apply those 5 Rs and hopefully kind of improve those resources over time. So that brings me to the next term, and that is what we call open and OER-enabled pedagogy. So open pedagogy, the way that Clinton LaSalle define it, is a method for students to be knowledge creators rather than only knowledge consumers. And a different definition is open pedagogy can be, or a different take on it, is that open pedagogy can be used to describe teaching and learning techniques that are possible through open licensing. So the second definition you could sort of think of as OER-enabled pedagogy. Now, to give you some context for these, I think a lot of these open education, or excuse me, open pedagogy approaches, a lot of you probably already employ. So if you do a topic where the students have to present to the class a presentation on some topic that they've researched, or maybe a project that they created, and they have to present that to the class, in that case, they are the knowledge creators. And so they're becoming the teachers as opposed to just being consumers that sit in a kind of more passive lecture format. So when the students are the creators, that is an approach to open pedagogy. But the general sort of accepted use of open pedagogy is any situation where the students are the knowledge creators. And oftentimes those products that they're producing are openly licensed. And so that's where this OER-enabled pedagogy comes into play. So for the purposes of today's talk, what I'm presenting is using open pedagogy techniques where students are creating products that are themselves openly licensed. So some examples of things that you can do with students that would be open pedagogy activities could be editing Wikipedia articles on a topic that you're working on as a class. It could be producing videos that demonstrate examples that future students could watch in order to learn how to answer a math problem, for example, or how to do some sort of calculation, or maybe some laboratory procedure where students are taping themselves actually performing that procedure so that students know how to do it when they go to do that lab. Other examples could be writing test blank questions. So you probably all have done the activity where you have students write a question that could potentially be included on an exam. So that would be an example of open pedagogy, especially if you make that exam question bank available to others to use. You could use social annotation. So examples of that are some websites you can enable an annotator, like a plugin in your browser where you can annotate a website and get commentary on either a book or a web page from your whole class. So it's kind of, everyone is kind of taking notes and sharing those notes on the document together. You can also have students develop syllabi or even co-creating a textbook. So the key feature with all these is that these products are not disposable assignments. It's not just the student creating a product, the instructor grading it, and then that being the end of that assignment. These are products that are long-lived and can be used by future students or by the general public. So instead of disposable, we call them non-disposable or persistent or renewable. So there's a couple different terms that people use in the literature for this. So I'm going to give you an example for an approach that I took in one of my classes. So I teach an upper level undergraduate, lower level graduate course called Agron 635, Soil and Water Conservation. And for this class, I wanted to flip the classroom. But in order to do that, I needed to make sure that the students were actually reading the assignment. So that was one of the goals for the class. The previously used textbook for the course was the cover that you see on the right, Soil and Water Conservation for Productivity and Environmental Protection. And the issue I had with this book, well, I had a few issues. One was it was last published in, I think, like 2001 or 2004, something like that. So it hadn't been published. There wasn't any recent copies of it. And the people that published it last, the three authors that you see here, they were all emeritus by the time that they published the last copy. So I didn't have high hopes that they were going to put out a 5th edition for it. The textbook actually is pretty affordable. You can buy paperback copies for about $25, something like that. So it was a relatively affordable textbook. So it wasn't so much that the students were buying it. And in fact, like the students in my class all had a copy. But when I asked them a question from an assigned reading, they almost never actually responded, or they never actually had an answer for it. And the reason was they just weren't doing the reading. It's a very, very dense book with a lot of text. The pictures are not good quality, and the students just weren't making use of the textbook. Now, there weren't really any other textbooks on the market that matched the content that I wanted to teach in the course, but I did want to flip the classroom so that we could have the students read and then engage in discussion based on that reading. And so I started looking at other options. And ultimately, what I decided to go with is in my profession, there are a lot of government publications and extension publications that are publicly available. They're not necessarily openly licensed, but they're all freely available online. And so what I ended up going with is an annotated bibliography where students would read some resource. So it could be like maybe like a 4 to 8 page extension publication, or maybe a couple page technical bulletin from a related federal agency. I would use those documents as our reading assignments. And the students actually preferred reading those over a normal textbook because they were generally shorter. They were kind of more concise and to the point, and they worked pretty well as reading assignments. But I thought about, like, what are the ways that we can make this whole process more engaging. And I also wanted some help to actually create this annotated bibliography. And so ultimately it was published in 2019 through New Prairie Press, which is K-State's digital press through the library. And we had 25 collaborators, which were all chapter co-authors. And of those 25, 20 of them were my students. So we had 9 from one semester and 11 from a different semester. And over the course of those 2 semester offerings of this course, we had students contribute to several of the chapters in the book. We licensed it through a Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. So this is the little logo they use for that sort of license. And what this means is that pretty much all of the rights that I mentioned earlier, all the 5 R's, anyone can do anything they want according to those 5 R's, like however they want, as long as they give attribution to the original source. So they can do whatever they like, as long as they say this was originally made by Colby Moorberg and team through New Prairie Press in 2019. So that was the license that we used. We followed a traditional textbook organization for this annotated bibliography. We have standard chapters, and then we have sections within each chapter, and then we would have a full citation with a short annotation below that. And in the end, we ended up having over 700 freely available online resources that were cited in the textbook. And each of them had a brief annotation that went along with them. So the steps that I took to create the textbook, the first one is I guess let me back up. So I sort of created a game plan for the whole textbook as a whole. And then once I had particular topics that I thought students would easily be able to contribute to, then I created an assignment that helped facilitate that. But these steps are sort of as a textbook as a whole. So I first identified the audiences. The primary audience are students in a class like mine, so upper level undergraduate, lower level graduate students. But the secondary audience is the general public. So I wanted to make this so that any farmer or rancher that wanted to employ some conservation practices, or maybe a a federal employee that's helping do the same thing, they'd be able to use this as a resource that can help them in their professions. So those are the two audiences that I had in mind. I created an outline, and then I created a guide to authors that had the specific style guide for how it actually cite each of these resources, what sort of information would be included in the annotations for each of those citations, and what sort of resources we were looking for. The goal was to make it so that all resources were available for free online. They didn't necessarily have to be openly licensed, and most of them weren't, but I wanted nothing in there that was behind a paywall. So everything was open to the public, so there wouldn't be any issues of access for the users. And from there, I recruited contributors. At the time, it was mostly through Twitter, and I ended up having 5 faculty from around the country that helped me out. And then we had 20 students from my course that helped as well. And to sort of facilitate all the communication, we used Google Documents for each of the chapters, and we used Slack for most of the communication. And then we managed the citations through Zotero, which is an open source and free citation management program. So from there, we started to select the resources, so all the things that we actually cite in the document. And yeah, I kind of went over the key attributes, but free, accessible, concise, credible, current, good quality, open license when possible. So that was the goal for all those. And then we also wanted the book to not just be a whole bunch of citations, because no one wants to read a plain bibliography. So we tried to add as many photos that were open licensed or in the public domain as possible. And you can see on the right an example of the webbook version of this annotated bibliography. I have a picture of one conservation practice that this section, contour, buffer, and prairie strips. I have a photo of the practice, and then we have all these different resources that were cited and annotated below. So that's what this looks like in the webbook. And we optimized this or we created this in Pressbooks, and we optimized everything for screen readers. One of the big challenges I faced was for these URLs, if you're visually impaired and you need a screen reader to help read through a web page or a book or something, a screen reader would go through and read out https://www, and they'd get really boring really quick. So every single one of these 700 citations, I had to go in and add a little piece of HTML code to the link. We call it an ARIA label. And the ARIA label basically tells a screen reader to say, instead of this link, it would say link to this web page or this document, and that way it doesn't read through every single character. So that was probably the biggest lift. That was kind of a surprise to me, but I learned some HTML in the process. From there, we went and did editing and formatting, and eventually it got published. And since then, I've been fixing a whole bunch of broken links. So that's kind of one negative of doing this annotated bibliography, is when the NRCS, which is one of the main agencies that we had a lot of resources used in this document, when they updated their website, all my links broke. And so, or all my NRCS links, which ends up being about 300 in this document. So I'm still finding broken links here and there today. So the assignment that I used for using this open pedagogy approach was I had students select a topic that they would focus on. And what I actually did is I had them pick one conservation practice. And I also had them choose one either conservation agency or one conservation policy. So I had 2 different assignments throughout the course of the semester, one in the first half of the semester, one in the second half. And they had to choose from a list that I had in the original outline for the book. And they had to hunt down for a list of different types of documents. I wanted a government publication. I wanted a extension publication if there was one. I wanted a picture of a conservation practice, and a few other types of documents like that. And so they had to search for the relevant content, evaluate whether it's credible or not. And then I had them do a full citation using the Zotero citation management software. And they submitted this as a Canvas assignment. And then later on, so I talked to them about the possibility of including this assignment in this open textbook that we were working on as a class. and they voluntarily submitted a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, to allow it to be included in the textbook. So they are the creators, and so they would own the copyright for that material. And so this MOU was granting me the rights to include that in the book. Now, initially, the students actually had some concerns about that. So the biggest concern was that they were very self-conscious about being directly attributed with a section that they wrote. So they were not confident in their writing abilities, and they didn't want to have their name saying, like John Doe wrote this section on contour buffer strips or something. Like they didn't want to have it like that to that level of detail for the attribution. And so what we ended up doing is through the editing process, I would have them submit their assignment. I would grade it based on the rubric that we have for the assignment. And then from there, I would take their version and I would edit it myself. And that way, with me editing every single annotation throughout the whole book, we had a consistent voice throughout the entire product. And then once I was done editing it, I would send each chapter to a technical editor who would go through and double check for grammar mistakes, spelling mistakes, or like issues with the style for the citation of each citation in the book. And once that was all done, then everything looked consistent. And then the students were credited as chapter co-authors. So whatever section that they submitted, it was added to the appropriate chapter based on the outline, and then they got credited as a chapter co-author. So I went through each citation and edited the annotation, edited the captions for the photos, and then I had a technical editor go through things. And then in the end, I went through and did all the final formatting of Pressbooks. And then we published it in Newport Press back in 2019. And that was it. That was the final product of the textbook. So I have ideas for other open pedagogy assignments that I'm either working on or will be working on for my courses. So I'd like to do the same sort of open annotated bibliography for my intro course that I teach at Ground 305. Another assignment that I've been doing is over the last probably 5 years, I've had an extra credit assignment where students could submit a link to a song, either on Spotify or YouTube Music. And the song has to be somehow related to soil science. So it could be a lyric, it could be a theme of a song, it could be the song title, or some other kind of random mention of it. But over the course of those 5 or 6 years, we're up to, I think, over 300 songs. And I think, forget how many hours, like 16 hours of songs related to soil science. And it's actually a pretty eclectic playlist of songs. And at some point, I'm going to hopefully team up with someone in the music department to kind of analyze the submissions and maybe create a teaching publication out of it. But that is another example of an open pedagogy approach. For traditional lectures, there's lots of opportunity for photos. And one thing I thought about is creating some sort of assignment where students can create photos of some concept or conservation practice or other thing, and submit those with a Creative Commons license of some sort, and sort of build a photo library that we could use for my classes. So that's another example. Kind of a classic one is students creating like YouTube videos for how to do some particular process, or creating question banks. So those are all things that I've mentioned before, and all things that I'd like to use in my classes going forward. So with that, so we have 16 people on our talk today. My hope was to kind of go into like breakout sessions, but I think we have a small enough group where we might just stick as a group and maybe kind of go around the room and get ideas for what you guys think you might, or how you might employ this sort of practice in your classrooms. So how about this? Let's give you guys about 2 to 3 minutes to come up with your idea. And then once you're done with that, we'll start going around the room and kind of work on, or just present your idea. So kind of pitch your thoughts, and maybe we can kind of talk about it as a group to maybe refine those ideas. So let me stop sharing. Um, so yeah, take a couple minutes, and then we'll take some volunteers to go first. Sound good? All right. For those that just joined us, we're doing a kind of a breakout activity where you have a few minutes to come up with an idea for an open pedagogy activity they can do in your course. So give everyone maybe about 1 more minute, and then we'll come back and discuss them. All right. So I put two links in the chat here. So one is a case study for this open annotated bibliography that I presented. So if you want to read more details about how I use this open pedagogy approach to create that textbook, you can read about it in that case study. And then I posted a Word document that is sort of a list of questions that you can ask yourself as you kind of develop your idea for creating an open pedagogy assignment in your course. Um, so just a couple of resources just to think about later on. But does anyone have an idea for an open pedagogy approach they'd like to take in their class? Any volunteers? Doris, I see you unmuted, but we can't hear you. Any other volunteers while Doris is working on her mic?
I can talk a little bit about what I'm doing in my class this semester.
Yeah, that'd
That's
be great.
the open pedagogy inspired that I'm having. I'm teaching an advanced Spanish grammar course this semester. And so as part of that, I'm having my students do social media inspired assignments. So the first one is that they create a meme. So they have to take like some concept that we're studying and put it into meme form. And then they give like a brief explanation. They write up an explanation about kind of why they were inspired to create the meme. That part of it is more for the class, but the meme itself is something that can be shared out more broadly. I have them do a mini investigation and then create an infographic about some linguistic concept. And then I have them create a TikTok style video where they're teaching something interesting that they've learned. The idea being that they're taking what, like, kind of these more difficult concepts that we're learning and figuring out how to transmit that to a broader audience in a way that is concise and accessible.
That sounds great. Is there, so how are you getting those products like out to a broader audience outside of your class? Do you have like a single place where you're posting all of them, or the
Yeah, we
students just
have
sitting out on their own?
a social media account for our department, and so we post them on our social media page. I get permission from all the students, and I let them know that if they don't feel comfortable, I have a little Qualtrics form. After the assignments are graded and submitted, they get to decide if they want it to be made public or not, if they want it to be attributed to them, or if they would rather it be posted anonymously. And so I have like a couple of criteria that they can choose how they interact. It gets shared with the class that they don't have a say in, but most of them do want to share their work more broadly. So this semester, I have not had a student this semester say that they don't want their work shared. So
that's been my experience as well. Like students, if they know that it could potentially be valuable, like beyond that assignment, it seems like they're more than happy to make things available. So
yeah, they're really actually quite excited. And I kind of thought that I would have a lot more students being like, yeah, you can post it, but I don't want attribution. They're all like, either yes, attribute it to me, or they're like, I don't care, like you can or not. But I haven't had any students this semester who have said like, do it anonymously.
Yeah. Now there is a way that you can, so if you are applying Creative Commons licenses to different products, whether it be a meme or a photo or a document or something, there's one of the Creative Commons licenses is CC0, and that means that like there's no rights retained. So CC0, it's basically like putting it into the public domain, and you can do that with citing who the original source was, but you can also do it just anonymously, more or less. So if you look through like Wikimedia, like sometimes you'll see photos where people have submitted it as CC0. In some cases, it might be like public domain images that like came from the federal government, which can't be copyrighted. And so those are public domain, and sometimes they're posted as CC0, sometimes they're posted as like the original attribution, but there's no copyright retained. So so that'd be an option if you do have a student that doesn't want to be attributed at all. Is CC0. So well,
it's good to know.
Awesome. So are you applying any sort of Creative Commons licenses or are the students applying any licenses to their works, or is it just kind of going out into the
We haven't done that yet, but I think that I should. I would like to, like I said, we're posting them on our department's social media pages, but I would like to have maybe create a web page for that course and have like a log of all the things that the students have created. I think that could be good.
There's some good platforms out there for applying licenses, but also kind of keeping it as a collection. Like for photos, Flickr actually works really well. You can choose from a drop down menu like different licenses to apply. I'm not sure if you can do that with Imager. Imager seems like it's more commonly used for sharing memes and stuff, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some sort of option for licensing memes if they wanted to. But I mean, that's sort of the nature of memes, is that they just go out and go viral, but no one ever cites the original source. So
yeah, which is kind of the idea, is to just have it be
Yeah.
something that's more familiar to the students, and in a way that they are already accustomed to communicating, and show them that like this is a valid form of transmitting a message, right? Like that you can take something, even something very academic, and make it something fun and silly and transmit a message that way.
This sort of brings up one thing that I always kind of wonder about when something goes viral is like, how do people track down the original source? And there's a couple like bloggers or like YouTubers and stuff that there's some web pages like it was like Know Your Meme. I think it's one of the web pages where they try to track down the original source. Be kind of interesting to do that as an activity for the class where they find some viral meme and then actually kind of trace it down to like who actually posted the photo in the first place. And I think in a lot of cases it's got copyrightable pictures that just escape into the internet, I guess. But anyone have any questions or comments for Andy? All right, Doris, did you get your mic working again? Oh, still can't hear you. Nope. All right, we'll let Doris work on that a little bit more. Any other volunteers for open pedagogy activities you'd like to use or maybe already use in your classrooms? So Noah, I'll put you in the spot. So you're the TLC kind of grad student that kind of leads this program, right? Have you had any activities where you've used like an open pedagogy approach and maybe didn't even know that was the case, but were you using it in your classes?
That's a really good question. Kind of before this presentation, I wouldn't have necessarily conceptualized it as open pedagogy, an open pedagogy practice. But after kind of hearing you had to say and Andy sharing your examples, in Dawn's class, it's an advanced social psychology class, which kind of has a strong like social justice component to it. Students create kind of a project at the end of the semester where they basically sum up the most important thing that they're taking away from the class, and they can create a short video or write a short paper. And I think that doing something kind of like Andy's saying, like presenting it in a really accessible, streamlined way that makes sense to people outside the class would be a really cool way to kind of get that information out there. So whether it's kind of about, destigmatizing mental health issues, for example, or something like that, kind of putting it in like a tweet or I guess X post, whatever it's called now, and other social media formats. I think that would be a really unique way to fun for students and also has value that extends outside the classroom.
Mm-hmm. About a decade ago, when blogging was a lot more popular, it seemed like it was a popular approach to have like a blog for a class, and each student would like write a blog post and they would post it out there. And I think that was kind of an early example of open pedagogy. It wasn't necessarily openly licensed, but you can always put on a CC license onto a blog post if you want to. But yeah, it's kind of a nice way for students to potentially build a resume if they have some sort of product that they could add to a portfolio or in the case of my students, they were all chapter co-authors on a textbook, which is not very common for grad students or undergrads. So, yeah.
No, I think that's a great point you make. And I think at least I've often heard kind of newer conversation about making sure that we're preparing our students for life outside of academia and kind of into the real world. And some of these practices might be ways to kind of get at both, applying our content, but also, like you said, making them marketable for whatever positions they might want to take after graduation. So I really like that point you made.
Yeah, I think that too, also asking students to kind of put things in their own words helps them to understand the content better. And when you're thinking about like, how do you express these complicated ideas and these like more academic things that we've been discussing, how do you transmit that to a broader audience? That helps them with the skills that they're going to need down the line, to be able to be good communicators in whatever job they're in. They're going to need to think about like, who am I talking to and what way can I express this that it's going to be understood by my audience. So I think that highlighting that explicitly and telling your students like, this is something that you will use in the future can be really meaningful for them, and it helps them to invest in what they're doing.
So Sarah mentioned that she likes the idea of having students find music and videos on environmental justice for her class. So Sarah, are you already doing that, or are you thinking about doing that for your class? All right, so she has not, but is inspired to do so. All right. Ashley says they do a couple things in my class that use open resources, but not necessarily creates open resources. All right. All right, Tim.
Yeah, so I can make some comments, mostly about open resources. I think your open pedagogy ideas are very interesting, but maybe not so much experience here. So I'm happy that so first of all, stepping back, so I'm in the physics department, so I'm the department head and a physics teacher of mostly introductory classes. So almost all introductory science classes are somewhat canonical, and that's made them quite amenable to open source. We have the open stacks phenomenon, which is, I think, being relatively widely adopted. I don't think we've required a traditional introductory course textbook since about 2005. And this is just saved a ton of money. I mean, an amazing, back then the textbooks were sort of $200, for example, or even more now. So this has saved like a factor of 4 to 5. Now we still do it in part for practicality, but in part because there have been genuinely good sort of AI related advances on this front. We still use homework tools, and sometimes with OpenStack, this might have to be purchased with the free textbook. We might use a vendor's textbook where it has to be purchased, but you're still talking about costs that are sort of $35 a semester. It does not bother me as much that the textbook goes away. I mean, you made a point that retention is valuable, which in principle is true, but I have to say I have lots of textbooks from my undergraduate days that I never open up. They just take up space. So I'm not so addicted to that. So I mean, there is no reason for any introductory science class to require a conventional textbook. That's terrible. There's also no reason to require purchase of a lab book. And this is where we are ahead of, frankly, some of our other departments in physics. We do not require purchase of a lab book. There's such a thing called PDFs, for example. Other departments have not gone that far, and they still make students buy the lab book, and then also print it out, which is a sustainability issue. So these open source ideas are really important. I think they're quite mature because, in a sense, the free market has stepped in and given more options. And I'm surprised that K-State doesn't get more forceful about requiring the use of open textbook options. If I could wave a magic wand, I certainly would.
Yeah, and that actually, thanks for your comments. That actually brings me to it's a nice transition to a couple more slides that I want to share just to get some more information out there. I'm sure I get the right window going here. All right, so let me go to this slide. So I want to talk about the Open and Alternative Textbook Initiative. I've kind of recently signed on as one of the leaders for that program. Andy Bennett and Brian Linshield were kind of the two
I think you're muted, Colby. Oh, perfect.
I don't know what happened there. I was talking and then and my screen stopped sharing and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, just quit. I
All
don't
right.
know.
Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes.
All right. I'm not sure where what you guys caught or not there, but it was created back in 2013, and we've saved K students $10 million since it began. So it's been a huge success. It's been mostly a carrot as opposed to a stick option. So we have small grants that faculty can apply for. I know some of you that are here have applied and received some of those grants. The grants are up to currently up to $10,000. So the usual amount is between $2,500 and $5,000, and we try to save the larger grants like $10,000 for courses that have either a large enrollment or have a large potential for saving students money. So that's kind of the background on that program. In some cases, it's for developing brand new textbooks, which is sort of the bigger lift on the faculty's point of view. In other cases, it is for adopting or adapting an existing open textbook. So I highly recommend you guys check that out, and feel free to reach out to myself or Carolyn Jackson in the libraries, or Brian Linsfield or Andy Bennett. So all of us would be happy to talk more about that program. And then along with that, we have a fee that is applied to courses where open textbooks have been or are being used. So as long as you're not requiring students to pay for a textbook, you can set this up where students would pay a $10 fee to the course or for enrolling in that course, and $9 of that comes back to you as a faculty member to maintain the resource that you are using. So in my case, I have 2 courses with laboratories where I've created open laboratory manuals, and I use these fees to help cover the cost of updating those lab manuals, creating a web book version of it, and so on. So those is a small amount of money, but it's just enough to do things like hire an undergrad to kind of help with formatting or something. So it's a great way to sustain these resources. And I think, yeah, we got about 3 minutes left. I do have some takeaways that I want you all to remember from this talk today. So open pedagogy, it's a great way to engage students. I think in some cases, a lot of you are already using open pedagogy techniques, but you might not have known that that's what it was called. So it's a great way to engage students, give them ownership of their own learning process, add value to assignments, and in the end, they're producing some product that they could potentially list on the resume or CV or portfolio or what have you. Some of the key activities, students become the knowledge creators, or the key attributes. Students become knowledge creators. They embrace the 5 R's of open, and these products are licensed appropriately. And we think of these assignments as renewable, not disposable. So those are my takeaways. We got about 2 more minutes. Any last questions or comments before we sign off for today's seminar? All right, so I will, in the chat, I'll put my email, maybe. I can Zoom to cooperate. I'll put my email in the chat in case you guys have questions about the OATI or anything else. It's just my last name at ksu.edu.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Colby, for this awesome presentation. I know you gave us a lot to think about for how we can incorporate these initiatives into our classes. So thank you so much. We'll put this up on our website later today for folks who weren't able to make it.
Sounds great. Thank you, Noah.
Thank you. I will put a post-event, or Ashley put a post-event survey link in the chat for those who have attended. If you complete that, that'd be awesome. But once again, thank you, Colby, and I hope you all have a wonderful spring break and take some time to rest and recharge next week. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.